Hello, this is Noreen at the Healthy Peaceful Podcast. In this episode, I continue my series on Ayurveda with a fabulous guest, Emily Fitz Randolph, who is currently the co-director of the LA Transcendental Meditation Center, which has two locations, one in Santa Monica. When teaching meditation in her local community, Emily focuses on teaching TM in a clear and practical way. She is a recent grad of the master's program in Ayurveda at Maharishi International University. Her new Ayurvedic practice will carry the name Itihas Ayurveda. I'm sure Emily will correct me on the pronunciation. Its meaning is blossoming of totality. And to Emily, this name serves as a reminder that we each have the capacity to reach our full potential. It is just waiting to burst forth. In her past life, before becoming a meditation teacher and Ayurvedic practitioner, Emily worked 15 years in the corporate sector, managing campus recruiting for top financial firms in New York City. Currently, she has swapped coasts, New York City for LA, LA for New York City, where she has resided and worked for the last 3 years. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much, Noreen. So happy to be with you and excited to chat about all things Ayurveda and meditation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's jump right in. I like to start with just a little bit. I've kind of given the your bio. You were working in the corporate world in New York City for over a decade, very much immersed. How did Ayurveda find you? You decided to jump into a master's program at Maharishi Ayurveda. You made a move to LA. Tell me a little bit about your journey, just for listeners and viewers who may be curious.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. So yes, I spent a long time in New York, and in that time, I was very focused on this sort of high intensity job and lifestyle. But my earliest years, I was actually born into a family of meditators, and I was born into a community of people who practiced Ayurveda, practiced meditation. And so that was sort of what I was immersed in as a child. And when I went off to college and started my career, it was like I forgot everything I knew. And I completely immersed myself in the mechanics of that world. So I became, living the lifestyle, working late hours, eating at my desk, right? And constantly trying to kind of succeed in that field. And, I enjoyed it in some ways. It was something I fell into, and I found I had an aptitude for that, the kind of analytical side and the people side. But I started to realize that I was completely focused on the outer world, and that I was following what everyone around me was doing. And I started to think, wow, I wish there was something easy and natural that I could do to bring me back to myself. And it was like I had this moment where I recognized that I had become disconnected from myself, from my nature, in this pursuit of, being successful in this world that I thought was the world, the way the world worked. And I started to just have these moments of returning to myself. I had sort of lost my meditation practice. And again, I mentioned I'd lost any kind of healthy lifestyle in many ways, or
Right.
health to me was eating a salad, right? And I started meditating again. That was the first thing. I started introducing a TM practice back into my day. And maybe it was once a day and once every few days. And what started to happen was something was re-enlivened in myself. Something was triggered where I went to a place of recognizing that disconnect. I had been so consumed with the outer, and I realized, wait, there's this beautiful inner world. And so for me, Ayurveda was something I had grown up with, right? I kind of knew what it was, but I didn't know it in a practical way. And what I started to realize that Ayurveda doesn't have to be some whole way of changing everything about yourself. It's something that can be incorporated into any lifestyle you have. Mm-hmm. So instead of eating at my desk in a rushed way in front of my computer in between meetings, I would say, wait, why don't I go outside? There's a beautiful park outside my office. Let me take my
Sure.
lunch. And maybe it's a salad. Maybe I'm still eating the salad. I'm not doing a cooked meal yet, but let me just eat in a settled way. So it was these little implementations that I started along with becoming a regular in my meditation practice that sort of on the one side reminded me of Ayurveda and reminded me of that connection to the self. And then also made me more curious and more aware that, wait, there's something else. And that I don't have to just follow the group, that I
Yeah,
don't
that's
think that
awesome.
we're doing the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you bring up some really great points. The first one is, by all, standards of kind of Western culture, and you were definitely living a successful life.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm hearing is there's a difference between success, outer success, and fulfillment.
Yes. Beautifully put. Exactly. Right.
And it doesn't mean that you can't, really in terms of the totally integrated life, you're having both.
Yes. Yes.
But one doesn't necessarily, but the outer success doesn't necessarily equate to inner fulfillment.
Beautiful. Yes. And I think
Yeah.
that's exactly right. Those two words you mentioned, fulfillment and integration, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I observed were people focused on success, outer success, and not really concerned with fulfillment or equating fulfillment with a task or a job title or a monetary amount of salary or whatever that was, and a lack of integration, right? A lack of understanding that there was something beyond those things. And I think for me, what was so surprising as I reflect back on that time in my life was that I was so seduced by that. I was so caught up. And I really am actually happy that I had that experience, because I don't come to it with I know how easy it is to be seduced by that way of being. And if that's all we've ever had, or that's all we see around us,
Sure.
there's almost this lack of knowledge that there's more than that, right?
Yeah, well, it's the world of shape and form and the appearances. And certainly being in places like New York and LA, where, especially LA, it's great that you've had that experience, because, that's the world that we're living in. That's
Right.
the reality. And you can more readily relate to both your meditation and Ayurveda clients in terms of what they're experiencing. Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
So, so take it to the next step. You started making, and I think I like the other point that you brought up about both transcendental meditation and Ayurveda. It's not as though you're going to leave your life.
Right.
You can improve, you can upgrade your life.
Exactly. That's it. And, so I was having this experience of sort of coming back to myself, right? And I thought, wait, this is incredibly practical. That was the first thing. This is practical. This is something we can implement. It's not something other. It's not something outside. It's not something we have to even be perfect at to get benefits from. And I think that can also be, again, in that field, there's a lot of perfectionism and drive, and we have to be the best and do it all perfectly. And that kind of can intimidate me. So I felt like, hey, we can actually put little nuggets of this into our day in a really practical way and start to see results. So initially, I had a desire to become a TM teacher. And initially, that was to teach other people in that environment, people in the business that I felt really needed this tool to maximize their effectiveness at their job. And in that sort of understanding, as I became more committed to my own TM practice and started noticing those results for me. And I often will describe it as, it was like turning on a light and in a room I didn't even know was dark. And suddenly I realized all of this had been illuminated. So I wanted to teach this side of it. But I think what we also start to recognize very quickly when we have a practice like a meditation practice, and specifically TM in my case, which really allows us to reconnect with ourselves, is we start to notice that experience of meditation and that experience of how we feel outside of meditation is also dependent on how we're treating our body, how we're treating our mind outside of meditation, right? So if I didn't sleep as well the night before, my meditation may be impacted. If I'm eating poorly during the day, I'm now more sensitive to my inner world. So I might notice that doesn't agree with me as much. So there starts to be that subtle awareness that is brought in. And again, this is why I personally think that, Ayurveda and meditation are so intimately connected. We certainly can't have one without the other in many ways, because we start to pick up on the delicate, most subtle level of our physiology, of our way of thinking. And so we need sort of that lifestyle component, or we can. It's helpful. So in conjunction with wanting to become a teacher, I wanted to pursue Ayurveda, and I learned about the master's program at MIU, which is a fabulous program and completely integrative. And I pursued it along with TM teaching. I sort of did a whole 180 in my life and felt like, why am I focusing on this outer world when it's the inner world that's the most important? And only once we address the inner world do we find, like you said, more fulfillment in the outer world. Because life is here to enjoy. We are here to be successful and dynamic and creative in whatever field we want to be. But if we're neglecting that inner consciousness, right? Or like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi would say, if we're not watering the root, then how can we possibly enjoy the fruit? Yeah. And so I pursued the program and began really understanding Ayurveda in a whole new way, while also beginning to really guide people to their own experience of consciousness through TM. So it's been over the past 3.5 years of being a teacher of TM and in this Ayurveda program, this beautiful balance for me of just enlivening that complete picture of reality.
Wonderful. Yeah. So let's talk about specifically Maharishi Ayurveda and its connection to consciousness.
Yes.
I mean, that's a big question. So you can, just riff on a small part of it, what your experience has been. If somebody asks you a question about how Maharishi Ayurveda is different than Ayurveda,
yes.
Just, whatever you're comfortable talking about.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that question. I think it's such a beautiful question to ask. What is the difference and why? And I actually, it was interesting, many of the students who joined this program to learn about Maharishi Ayurveda aren't familiar with what the difference is or what this is. Sure. But essentially, Maharishi Ayurveda is using consciousness as the foundation of the practice. So Ayurveda, science of life, is that understanding of how to bring balance to our life, Ayurveda. And Ayurveda always, in traditional form, uses lifestyle changes, behavioral changes, herbal, dietary to address that individual. And it's incredibly helpful, incredibly useful. What we've understood, unfortunately, though, with a lot of Ayurveda is that real knowledge has been lost. It's like that game of telephone that happens over time. Knowledge can become distorted as our own level of consciousness perhaps is diminished over time. And so what Maharishi Ayurveda is it's bringing back that consciousness-based approach to our Ayurvedic practices. What it understands is that consciousness, which is that pure, unbounded field of awareness, which underlies everything in creation or is all of creation, must be addressed. It's the most subtle, most infinite, and most profound level of reality. And if we're not addressing consciousness itself when we practice Ayurveda, then we're not getting the full picture of the individual, of the disease, of the imbalance. And even the way that Ayurveda understands health, right? We understand the most fundamental principles of Vada, Pitta, and Kapha, which are the manifestations of the 5 elements that manifest into Vada, Pitta, and Kapha. They are in themselves that tridosha. Those 3 elements, those 3 doshas, are themselves a field in balance. And that field in balance, that sanghita, that wholeness of Vada, Pitta, and Kapha, that's perfect health. That itself is the earliest manifestation of consciousness. So while we address in Ayurveda Vada, Pitta, Kapha, knowing that those are the roots of imbalance, the root of disease, we have to understand the wholeness of Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Where do Vata and Pitta, Kapha emerge from? What is the underlying root? And Maharishi Ayurveda is all about enlivening that pure inner intelligence in the individual. So it is completely empowering to the individual, right? Where meditation comes in is it's the tool to experience consciousness, right? Consciousness isn't a concept. It's not an intellectual idea, right? Without actually experiencing that, then we aren't understanding ourselves. So we can operate with a lot of knowledge of what I need to eat, of what I need to do, of what my dosha imbalance or balance is, what my prakriti is. We can know that from an intellectual level, but without actually understanding that self, then knowledge is incomplete. So in short, what I love about Maharishi Ayurveda is that it's addressing the whole individual, not just the parts. Ayurveda is doing the same, but Maharishi Ayurveda is taking it to that most fundamental level. And then the other aspect of what Maharishi Ayurveda has done is that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi gathered together the most ancient texts and knowledgeable resources and Vaidyas on this subject and brought them together so that there was the most complete knowledge intact. And when we learn Maharishi Ayurveda, we never lose that connection with that consciousness. We never lose that connection with understanding that root of all of the knowledge and where that's come from. So I think, again, as a practitioner, the value we can bring to our client is even more profound because we're arming them with not just tools that they can use, but fully knowledge of the self in the most fundamental way, the most real way that we can experience ourselves.
Sure. No, absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm thinking about the connection between meditation, the transcendental meditation, and Ayurveda, which you described so beautifully. But I'm also thinking, if I'm a client and I'm new to meditation, I'm new to Ayurveda, I may be a little bit lost.
Yes.
I know what consciousness means, but I'm wondering how all of this is going to be useful to my daily life. I'm sure you get some of that.
Absolutely.
But one thing I'm thinking of is, in Ayurveda, they talk about, how many disorders or diseases are caused by Vata dosha, which is the essentially the energy, the motion, the nervous system, being unsettled, being ungrounded. And so I'm thinking, because many of our diseases today are psychosomatic, that looking at the mind and the nervous system and talking with clients about how meditation can be beneficial.
Beautiful.
And, so how can that be beneficial to, to someone, a client comes in, how is it going to be beneficial to, because insomnia, I mean, it's so, it's so prevalent, really. And it's more than, in Ayurveda, they say, get up with the sun, go to bed by 10, but it's more than that,
Absolutely.
It's more than that. So how do we really communicate to our clients that, hey, this could really, this could actually help shift your paradigm. This could actually shift your nervous system. It doesn't mean it's the only tool, but with regular practice and meditation, you are going to notice a significant transition in your health.
Absolutely. I think this is a primary thing that I focus on with my TM students. So very simply, for those who aren't familiar with transcendental meditation, and I'm just going to use this as a very short analogy because I think it's helpful just to have this context, or even if you are familiar with TM, I think many people might like this refresher that we can think very simply of an ocean, right? Busy, active surface level of the ocean. But if we dive to the depth of that ocean, completely quiet and still. Now, our mind has this same structure. right? Our mind has this dynamic, busy, active nature, like the surface of the ocean, always going, moving. We can sometimes feel overshadowed, right? By thoughts, by feelings. Now, this is where the Vada comes in. Many of us live in that sort of Vada imbalance. And our society, as we talked about earlier, is completely set up to be Vada aggravating, meaning that Vada dosha, that natural Vada tendency, which we all have in different ways in our physiology, can be exacerbated by a lot of irregularity, by the foods we eat, by all of this activity. So if we're living in that way, if we're living up here in that surface level of the ocean, something is blocking us from that full scope of the mind. If our mind is like the ocean, we have both that dynamic activeness, but we also have this quiet, silent, settled state. And that's there all the time. It never leaves us. And yet we're blocked from it, right? We're experiencing that activity 99% of the time. So what transcendental meditation is doing, and there are many, many beautiful, beautiful, valuable meditation techniques, but what TM does is it allows the mind to experience quieter, finer, more subtle levels of thinking, naturally and automatically. It's like taking a dive, right? So if we take a dive into the ocean, all we do is we get in the position, we take a little jump, gravity does the rest. Same thing with TM. We're setting up the conditions for the mind to now experience those quieter and subtle levels. Now, as this happens, as the mind settles down, the body settles down, right? Because the mind is the body and the body is the mind. We tend to think that we have our mind and we have to get more knowledge in our mind, and then we have our body over here and we're working out our body. But it's absolutely the same thing, right? Every thought we think creates a physical molecule called a neuropeptide. So to simplify it, a healthy thought creates a healthy physical molecule. Unfortunate thought, unfortunate physical molecule. So if we're living up here again on this surface and we're not experiencing those quieter levels, it's like we're disconnected. So what TM is doing mechanically, very, very simply, is allowing the mind to now experience these quieter levels. And the result of experiencing those quieter levels is that when we come out of meditation, it's like we're pulling that up with us. So in the practice, our sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight response, right? We're all very familiar with that fight or flight response, the elevated cortisol levels and adrenaline, prefrontal cortex sort of shuts down. We have that response in our physiology when that sympathetic nervous system is upregulated. And many of us are living in that way, unfortunately, today. During the practice of TM, that sympathetic nervous system starts to downregulate. And the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for conservation and rest in the physiology, starts to upregulate. So we actually get this flood of dopamine and serotonin and other relaxation neurochemicals. So when we come out of meditation, we not only feel more at ease and more connected, but we've quite literally settled things down. Okay. So when I see clients, whether meditation students or Ayurvedic clients, just like you mentioned, Noreen, Vada is typically a predominant factor. It may be there coupled with something else, but for most of us, we see Vada imbalances, which again could show up as we feel stressed, we're feeling things shut down in the physiology, whether constipation, insomnia, things like that. This is a direct result of a Vada imbalance. So how do we tackle a Vada imbalance? Two ways. We tackle it first, primarily through settling things down. This is going to give us the biggest sudden boost. So many of my students come out of their first TM session going, wow, I had no idea I could settle down this much. I thought my mind was crazy. I have ADHD. I didn't know. But now I'm feeling much more calm, much more settled in my physiology. So once that's been addressed, once they realize, oh, there's some shift that just took place without me doing anything, there's more inclination to want to start to implement some lifestyle changes. Could be simply, oh, well, now I actually feel naturally more tired at 10 p.m. So I think I'm going to go to bed at 10 p.m. And I'm sleeping a little bit better. And I wonder why. Well, that's because now the body and the mind have had a couple opportunities during the day to release some of that stress. So now we fall asleep faster. The quality of sleep is deeper. And then we wake up. Interesting. I'm waking up naturally at 6. And so things start to make sense. So this is where this sort of hand in hand meditation and Ayurveda comes into play. Now, sometimes we're just not there yet. And I just think this is a really important thing with all of this. We're curious about Ayurveda or curious about meditation, but perhaps there's something blocking us. Like, well, I'm not a meditator. I can't take that much time. Or, I don't want to change my lifestyle. I don't want to go to bed at 10 or eat, my main meal at lunch. I love going out to dinner with my friends every night.
I don't want to eat khichdi.
Yeah. Who wants that? Right. But then we start to notice things happening in the body. So it's like we can sort of allow the body to take over and then influence the mind, or allow the mind to take over and influence the body. So these sort of go hand in hand. And I like that connection with, introducing TM and then seeing these Ayurveda principles make more sense, or introducing Ayurveda and then saying, oh, okay, I get why a meditation might help me to calm these things down a little bit more.
Yeah, that's they can walk in through different doors.
Yes, right, exactly.
But it's all leading to the same place. It's leading to that place of wholeness if they want to welcome it.
That's right.
That samhita quality of life, which is definitely enhances life in so many ways. So
that's right. Beautiful.
Now, the Masters of Ayurveda program that you were recently completed, my understanding is you just graduated. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's quite a road. Any surprises for you? I know that you said that you grew up in a meditator family, specifically TM, and so Ayurveda was around you. But yeah, any surprises, either things that you learned about Ayurveda that you didn't expect, or things about the program that were challenges for you? So anything that you'd like to share in that regard?
Yeah, beautiful. First of all, I can't speak highly enough about the program. I think it's a phenomenal, comprehensive, as much as possible overview of Ayurveda. We learn so much. I think my sort of basic understanding of Ayurveda prior to this was, I would go, luckily I had access to Ayurvedic doctors that I could go to as a child. And I remember, maybe at 14 going to an Ayurvedic doctor and they said something and I couldn't really understand it. And then suddenly I was at home and my mom was telling me, you should eat this and you should eat that. And what I found from it was at that time, at that age, feeling like, well, this is hard, or I can't do it, or nobody else is doing this. And I think this is a trend for me, and this maybe being caught up with what other people are doing too much. So what I found when I came into the program was how we can just take these simple components and start to make little changes, that it doesn't have to be something we're just reinventing our whole way of being. And this to me, I think is something that I really emphasize. And I want to make clear again, in both my TM teaching and in my Ayurvedic practice, is that Ayurveda, it has this name that seems like foreign and what is that? And what I find is that it's just the most practical way of living and of being. It's the most simple, straightforward, intuitive way of being that we could hope to have knowledge of on this planet. The thing that always was interesting in my own experience was, well, if I kind of grew up with this and I had this knowledge, why wasn't I doing it? Why wasn't I doing all of these things? So I think the most transformative element that I learned in this program was the concept of pragya parat.
Yeah. Speak to that.
You may have spoken with many of your guests about this on your podcast before, but this concept of pragya parat is very simply mistake of the intellect. It's that at some place, right? Some subtle place, and it could be something very, something subtle has happened in our physiology that has led to this, and I can explain more about this, that the mind has become, or the intellect has become mistaken, meaning we are losing some inner intelligence that is allowing us to maybe make the healthy choice, make the right choice, the choice that is best for us. And instead, we are going in a direction that is not serving our mind and body, and yet we are thinking that we are. And all of this it can be from something as simple as thinking one thing and saying something else, right? Not walking the talk, not following our bliss. This can be at the cellular level. There's been some little misfiring, miscommunication at that level. And now we find ourselves going down a road that we think is good and healthy and right, and yet it is completely wrong for us. And this is a state.
I want to just pick up on a point there.
Yes.
I want you to describe more about what you mean when you say at a cellular level, because it sounds like what you're saying is this concept of mistake of intellect, which is in Ayurveda the cause of all disease, all imbalance, that it's happening at a level that's not merely the intellect.
That's right.
So speak to that.
That's right. This concept, right, of mistake of the intellect is in fact happening at the most subtle cellular level, right? We tend to describe this as we're overusing, misusing, underusing the senses in some way, right?
Yeah.
So the senses are the instrument with which we connect with the world. And what a beautiful blessing that we have these senses, right? We have touch and taste and smell and sight and hearing, and we use those to move through the world, gain information. So they're an instrument. They're something we're playing, we're using, and we want those instruments to be the most refined, right? If we were all playing in an orchestra together, we'd want to make sure that our instruments were perfectly tuned so that that harmony could be perfect. If our instruments are in some way compromised, then when we go to use them, there will be a loss of information or a loss of clarity in the instrument of our senses. Now, how would it be possible for our senses to be compromised? Well, again, that's starting from the level of consciousness itself, right? If our consciousness, if our self-referral consciousness is not awake to itself, meaning we are, in a sense, turned in the wrong direction, turned away from the self, then naturally everything we perceive will be having to be transformed or translated is the word I was looking for, translated through something that is in itself not intact. So we can look at this as turning away from the self. We talk a lot, Vedic understanding talks a lot about self-referral consciousness, right? Curving back upon myself, I create again and again is a beautiful quote that describes all of creation. What is being described there is the most fundamental level, which is sort of more profound than Vada, Pitta, Kapha, which is Rishi, Devata, and Chandas. Rishi is the knower or the observer. Devata is the process of observing or the process of knowing. And Chandas is the known or the observed. And these three are, in a sense, the three elements of everything. It is through the self observing the self and having an experience of that three-in-one consciousness, meaning knowing itself as the knower, recognizing that there is a process of observation and recognizing itself as the observed, and at the same time one. This must be intact. This is the Samhita, which is the basis for Vada, Pitta, and Kapha, which manifest into that field of balance, which manifests into the physical body. So when that disconnect is happening at the most subtle level, then we experience that mistake of the intellect. Then none of our senses can pick up accurately, and we find ourselves engaging in further misuse of our senses, which leads to further blindness and further lack of self-referral consciousness. So again, what I find in my experience, both in Ayurveda and in TM, is that the only tool to bring us back to the sense or the self, right, is to transcend the senses, to transcend any concept of self in a manifest way. Only when we transcend are we actually experiencing self-referral consciousness. So we could say that the root of pragyaparat is due to a lack of experience of self, a lack of experience of reality, which is transcendental consciousness, which is absolute.
Right. And would you say that it's not really knowing who we really are?
That's right. That's right. When we aren't self-referral, we don't have any clue. We pick up on the world around us. We're completely seduced by that world around us.
Yeah.
And we think that that is reality. We think that division of ourselves from that unified field of unbounded awareness is reality. When in fact, the only reality that there is that wholeness of experiencing the self, right? And then we come out of that experience and our life is more fulfilled because it's filled by that experience. But if we lose connection with that root, then we're always heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of your new Ayurvedic practice, I introduced you describing the name and what it means. But tell me a little bit about it and really how you want to engage with Ayurveda, how you want your clients to engage with Ayurveda and think about Ayurveda.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So my practice is called Itihas Ayurveda, and that name, which, is a little bit of a mouthful, I get it, is one of the 40 aspects of Vedic literature. So these 40 aspects are thought to be the building blocks of all of creation. So every impulse of natural law, every impulse is contained within these 40 aspects. And we can actually look at each aspect as not only representing one of these impulses in nature, impulses of natural law, but also being connected with the physiology. And this is such a beautiful understanding. So this was something I actually grew up with in school. We studied the 40 aspects. I think I had to memorize them at one point. But the one that I always loved in its essence was Itihas. And Itihas represents blossoming of totality, blossoming of that full sense of self. Itihas in Sanskrit is also thought of as a history. So sometimes you'll see an Itihas is the Ramayana or a history of India. But Itihas in this context is thought to be this enlivening of our already enlightened self, that enlivening of our inner nature. And so this is what Ayurveda does, right? It empowers us to bring that balance back into ourself. I think what's so beautiful about being an Ayurvedic practitioner is that we are not practicing with the goal of having a client dependent on us. If we're a really good practitioner, we are arming them with their own knowledge. And so that they go on and they become their own Ayurvedic practitioner of themselves. They know themselves best. And we act as guides to that. So my practice is all about really empowering people through very simple changes that we can make, whether it's, again, lifestyle, diet, ideally bringing meditation practice into the mix. Many of my clients already practice TM, so that's handy. And I would sort of recommend it strongly, but it's not a complete requirement. It's just going to help to amplify things more. But in my practice, I really make sure that everything we do is communicated in a clear way, that the understanding is there. I'm the type of person that I want to know why. I want to understand everything and why. Only when I know why will I be able to implement it myself. And so I like to teach my clients this as well. And that's actually something that I'm going to be starting within the next few months, is teaching more about this and offering classes and courses where people can learn about Ayurveda and learn, from the most simple concepts to the more advanced concepts and make it practical for them. And I think that's a really beautiful tool. So I'll certainly be advertising that more in the coming months.
That's great. Will that be online teaching or in person and online?
Yes. So I'm going to start by doing online courses,
Okay,
and
sure.
these will, be anything from, a 1 day course or, a couple hours to an
Hmm.
8 week course where you can join via Zoom. I
Awesome.
think this is very much needed right now. And so
Absolutely.
I love
Yeah.
teaching this stuff, again, in a really practical way and hopefully inspiring way.
Oh, absolutely. Is your website live for your Ayurvedic teaching yet?
So when this airs, it will be live. It's in its
Okay.
bare bones form, but it's simply itihasayurveda.com. And maybe you can put that down in the show notes
I
or something.
will. I'll
You
include
can
it in the
find
show
it.
notes. That's great.
Um, but I'll also just say, if anyone is curious to learn more, they can always find me at TM with Emily on Instagram or Itihas Ayurveda on Instagram. And I'm certainly taking clients both in person in LA and also virtually wherever you are in the world.
That's wonderful. That's really great. Um, you've been in LA for 3 years, and I know you were in New York for many years. So tell me, and of course, what you're doing for how you're spending your days in LA is very different than the way you spent your days in New York. But what do you see culturally? What's been challenging for you? What's been challenging for you bringing, teaching meditation and now starting your Ayurvedic practice? Any
Yeah.
comments there that you'd like to describe?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I made the move from New York, and it was very, very different. I found LA at first much more calm and laid back, and which many people might not say the same. But compared to
Sure.
New York and in the business
Right.
that I was in previously, it felt relaxing over here. And I live
Yes.
on the
Yeah.
west side, so I get to be near the beach, and that still feels very exotic to me. I grew
Absolutely.
up in Iowa, so this is still
Oh
very,
yeah, yeah. There's
it's
no
wonderful.
ocean nearby.
No ocean nearby. So, what I've found, especially I'm over here on the west side in Santa Monica, and I think there's a lot of openness and across LA to more alternative, holistic ways of being. There is a
Of course.
focus
Yeah.
on health, and I think the world is moving in that way. I mean, truly, even just from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, there's much more of a focus on wellness and health and wholeness and what can we do and little things we can do. What I find in LA is, again, people are open. But there's also, the same thing that we see everywhere, New York, LA, everywhere, is that people want, and I understand this, but we want this sort of quick fix. We want almost like, give me a pill, give me a thing, let me do this thing, da, 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 da. And when it comes to, as we know in Ayurveda, it's not just a quick fix, right? We're not
No, no.
slap something on it, put a pill in it, and go about our business.
Right.
And that, I think, can just take a little time to understand that concept. The other thing I see, and this is something that
Let me just follow up on that one. So
sure.
how do you overcome what's basically Americans are impatient?
Yes.
It's yeah. So
Yeah.
how do you overcome that? How do you overcome
Yeah.
that with your
Well,
clients?
I'll answer this first just from like a TM perspective,
Sure,
because
yeah, because that's
this
what
is
you've been
something,
doing.
this is what
Yeah,
I've been doing. And I see
right.
this with, I've taught by the end of this year, I think I'll have taught 1,000 people.
Wow,
So lots of
congratulations. That's
interest.
great.
Yeah, it's amazing. I feel really fortunate to be here in a place where a lot of people want to learn. But there's a lot of stress, and,
Of
they
course.
have to make a commitment first to a 4 day course, which that in
Right.
itself, it's just an hour and a half each day, but still 4 days in a row doing this thing, an hour
Yeah.
a lot. And then they've got to commit to meditating all the time. So what I think that I've found to be the most effective is first just make it simple. Don't put it up on this pedestal of, yes, we recognize this is this huge thing that you have to do, but do what you can, right? So 20 minutes twice a day is ideal. But some people are, they are not going to be able to do 20 minutes. And if they can't do it perfect, they won't do it at all. So do 10, that's okay. You're at least going to be tapping into that. That's going to be important. Just doing what you can. And also being someone who's available all the time. One of the things that I love about TM teaching is that I'm available to my clients anytime if they need a little tune up, a little check in. And what we often find is that we check in for 30 minutes, and you can do it over Zoom even, and they just feel like, oh my gosh, it's that easy, because they have that experience of settling down to the self, and they realize, oh, this is easy. I've been pushing, I've been straining. And so sometimes it's just that constant reminder. Again, it's like back to Pragya Parat. We forget. We really quickly become seduced by whatever we have, and we forget how easy it is to like do less and accomplish more, right? So I find that being really accessible, making it feel bite-sized, manageable, achievable, not having crazy goals, but having little goals with yourself. Okay, I'm going to meditate twice a day for 3 days in a row. How's it going to, that kind of thing can be really helpful.
Yeah, just really, and also just, I like the fact that people can check back, and they could just make sure that, and they can report back, and it's good to know that maybe they are doing it, that it is a specific technique. So it's good to be able to have that follow-up, that access. So that's great. I know that, Tony Nader's had a lot of initiatives, Dr. Tony Nader, the head of the TM organization. Very exciting initiatives, actually. Is there something in particular that really resonates with you that you're excited to bring to your clients going forward, or either with TM, Ayurveda, or
yes.
What are you excited about currently?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I think there's a lot to be excited about in this space. Sure. I think that with this, the TM organization, they have made huge strides in making this more accessible. Just, for one thing, bringing the digital course to people. So now you don't have to come into a TM center 4 days in a row.
Yeah, I would love for you a lot of people are confused about that.
Yes. So
they still think they have to come in person. My understanding is there's an app, and people can do three. It's about 4 1.5 hour sessions, but 3 of those sessions can be on the app. Is that how it is? Or
yes. So just briefly, if anyone is listening and they're curious about TM,
sure.
This is a beautiful hybrid model. So traditionally, the course is taught in person all 4 days, and you're going to get, a beautiful experience going through in person, certainly. But now we have this option where they can learn hybrid. So the first session is still in person, because that instruction with your TM teacher is very important, very delicate. So that first instruction is in person, but then you're right. The second, third, and fourth day are done using our digital course, which you can download on your phone and go through on your own time. And this has been huge. I've taught hundreds of people this way since the beginning of the pandemic, and people are getting so much out of it. You're getting all the information you would get with your teacher, but it's in a series of interactive videos and lectures, and you can watch it many times, and you'll have it for more time. And then you meet every evening over Zoom with your teacher and connect. And this is a beautiful way to learn this technique. Make sure you're learning it correctly, but on your own time, in a way that's maybe easier. I taught a lot of maybe new moms with little babies who can't really get away for 4 days, but they can do something on the phone, or people who just have very busy jobs. Or I've taught, again, a lot of like surgeons, doctors, nurses will come to TM, and they really enjoy this hybrid model. So that's a really excellent way to teach. And I think that, with Dr. Nader's sort of push to make this available for people, there's a lot of online content now, higher learning, continued education around consciousness itself, this beautiful new program to become a consciousness advisor, where you can really understand intellectually and experientially what consciousness is. What are we talking about here? What does this mean to have higher states of consciousness? So now you can be your own teacher and teach others and advise on consciousness. So I think that's a really beautiful thing that's being offered right now. And I think ultimately there's...
Do people have to be TM teachers to be consciousness advisors? Do you need to be a TM teacher to be?
You can be a new meditator. In fact, I think there's maybe 2,000 or maybe more people taking this course that's going on right now.
It's the first course, right? Consciousness advisor?
Course. Yes. Many of them are TM teachers. Many of them are new meditators, right? Who are like, I want to go deeper. I want to learn more. So this is being offered now. There are book clubs around the country. People are diving into Dr. Nader's new book, One Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness, which, if anyone hasn't read it yet, I highly recommend. It's fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that I'm really excited about the direction of this whole, organization of TM, just the fact that more people are meditating. I think I'm excited about the state of the world, even though it feels absolutely insane, right? It feels like, could things get any worse? And there's wars and what's happening. But I was actually speaking with another teacher yesterday, and we were talking about this, and he was sharing this beautiful analogy that will come up often of, or this little story of the snake and the string. So I don't know if you've heard this one recently, right? But
I have, but I'd love for you to share it.
Yeah, so I think it's a lovely thing to just keep in mind as we're going through this. And it for me, it gives me this reminder of, oh, right. But in this little story, there's a town full of people, and there's a big tent that's been set up where they're going to have speakers. And it's a little dark in the tent. And one of the townspeople, the group is gathered in there and they're listening. And one of the townspeople looks over and they see on the ground a snake. And they're terrified, and they alert everybody in the tent, and everyone is screaming and running. And so all the blood pressure is going through the roof. People are getting trampled, running out of the tent. They're terrified of this snake. And they get out of the tent, and it's just mayhem. The doctors are being called. People are fainting, heart attacks. It's just calamity. And someone goes back into the tent to get that snake, and they turn on a light, and they notice it's a string. It's just a string, right?
Yeah.
What this is saying is, we perceive these threats and these dangers to be ever present. And our mistake of the intellect in these cases, right? Our mistaking the string for a snake has very real consequences, right? We will have the side effects of this heightened stress. It's not to say that these things that we believe are happening, are not really having impacts on the world, right? We're going.
Yeah, that's the, I think you hit the nail on the head, that it's, even though it's just a string, that episode, that experience, there's an element of trauma in that.
That's right.
And it's going to put everything on overload. And I think there's a mistaken belief that it's just your nervous system that's on overload.
Yes.
But it's really, it's your entire physiology.
That's right.
And exactly. It's not like you snap a finger and that adrenaline goes from here to here. It doesn't. So
that's right.
It's creating damage. So with repeated use, of course, but that's really great. And you started teaching TM during the pandemic. Is that correct? Or
right before the pandemic. So I became a teacher in 2019, beginning of 2019. So I taught for a year.
Okay. So you had a year. Yeah. How did you, what was the shift for you for the pandemic? I mean, obviously all of us were impacted in different ways, but as a teacher of meditation, which is very important, how did you see the pandemic impacting your teaching, or the way you were interacting, or even the way clients were interacting with you?
Yeah, beautiful question. So we, in Santa Monica, we have a very busy center, which is beautiful and fortunate. And we are able to teach hundreds of people a month, or hundreds of people a year, 1,000. But we had to shut everything down. So early 2020, I think in March, around March 15th or so, we shut everything down and we stopped operating. And then luckily, this TM digital course that had been in the works for a couple of years was accelerated. They pushed it through and they were able to get it out. I think it was June or July. And so in June or July, we started teaching people through this digital course. Now, in the meantime, before the pandemic, we had 6 group meditations every single week. We would have 30 or 40 people in the TM Center almost every day. And we really had a beautiful, thriving community. And these people would come and practice and they'd share with their friends. So there was just a very big, vibrant community. And we had to shut everything down and we took it all to Zoom. So we were doing many meditations over Zoom, which was great. And, I think this was a lifeline for a lot of people, especially in those early days of quarantine. Many meditators in our community, were maybe single and older, and they really looked forward to this for their social life. So now we could take it online, and that was helpful. But I feel that, that what I've actually enjoyed about that time of being able to bring this virtually to people is I think it opened up our ability to connect with people. And, we have some restrictions of what we're able to communicate over Zoom and
sure,
all of that. But I found that I was able to connect with students that probably wouldn't have maybe made the trip back into the TM Center, or they'd moved away somewhere. And now I was able to connect with them. So I was doing many, many check-ins and refresher courses over that year of the pandemic when we were totally shut down. And,
great. So really just increased accessibility, really.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
With some hiccups, of course.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. I know there was something else. Okay. I talked about Dr. Tony Nader's and some of the new initiatives and what's happening, what I've seen with the TM organization. But how about if you were to design a new initiative for Ayurveda, what would it be?
It's beautiful. Beautiful.
And, it could be something very simple, but just, if you were, somebody said, okay, come up with an initiative to grow Ayurveda. Well, what would it be?
I love that. Yeah, no, I think it's such a beautiful thing. And I've thought about this often, how would we grow Ayurveda? And I think it really goes back to some of the things we were talking about. I think Ayurveda needs to be practical and accessible and be brought to light in a way that feels easy, right? Like not simplifying it in any way, but we're talking earlier about everyone wanting the magic bullet or the pill. How can we make Ayurveda feel like a pill, right? How can we make it feel like, oh, I can just do this little thing and I get this result? And I think part of that is communicating this language in very clear ways and making it accessible, whether that's through social media, virtually, or doing more of that, or opening up these pop-up stores, offering full service wellness centers where we can provide different modalities of health, Ayurveda, yoga, meditation, herbal supplements. That's something that I see really as a forefront, is more of these centers where people can come physically or virtually. And actually, a number of my colleagues from my program and I are hoping to introduce sort of a portal, like a wellness portal, where someone can go and see many different Ayurvedic practitioners with different backgrounds. And many of the people who go through my program are nurses or doctors, or they have a yoga practice or some other skill set that they can bring to the table. So if there was sort of one stop where you could go and you could get a whole bunch of information, like a hub that was more Maharishi Ayurveda, I think that would be helpful. And I also know that the MAPI site, the Maharishi Ayurveda Products International, they are doing a lot on their site with podcasts and bringing the sort of bite-sized information out. So that's another wonderful resource I think that's happening, and I'm going to be involved in some capacities in the future.
That's great. That's wonderful. Those are all great ideas, by the way. And I like the language that you use: clear, accessible, and for Americans, bite-sized as well.
Yeah, right. As bite-sized as we can get it.
Okay. I know, Emily, that you're in the process of designing courses around Ayurveda, but if you were designing one course today, what do you think the most important things for you to really zone in on? Or what would people be most receptive to around Ayurveda if you were designing a course today?
Yeah, I think that's important. I think it would be sort of two components. I would want to make sure there is a course that really dives into the understanding of the doshas. And I think that's available in some ways, but I think this concept is still somehow there's some information lacking. So really to be able to see Ayurveda principles as practical and natural. So one of the courses that I'm planning to teach is, how do we understand Vada, Pitta, Kapha in relation to ourselves, in relation to the world around us, in relation to seasons. And this is sort of a way that then we can start to literally look at everything in our environment and say, oh, that's Kapha, that's Pitta, that's Vada. And once we have this terminology very easy, very accessible, right? That's heat, that's cold, that's dry, then everything that we come into context with is in that context. Oh, I'm feeling a little hot. It's summer. Well, maybe I shouldn't eat that hot thing. Maybe I shouldn't listen to that loud music, those kind of things. I mean, really simple stuff, making it really practical. So that's the first thing that I would do. The other thing is a little bit more advanced, but I think it would be really fascinating for everybody to have a basic understanding of pulse diagnosis. So pulse diagnosis is a really important part
Self-pulse.
of Maharishi Ayurveda, exactly, because you're actually understanding that most subtle level of your physiology. And so to be able to give people this tool to be able to get a little information in their own pulse would be something I think would be really valuable and interesting. And it kind of takes it up a notch with perhaps what's available most often out there right now.
Yeah, I love those. I love both those ideas, by the way. So awesome.
Beautiful.
I would look forward to the courses when they're designed.
Thank you. Yes, I will let you know.
Okay, awesome. We are going to shift a little bit and just go into a couple of rapid fire questions.
Beautiful.
And then I'll get your social media handles and all that and include all that in the show notes. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. What are the top 3 tips that you can offer for Ayurveda that are simple yet profoundly healing?
Beautiful. So my top 3 tips that I often give to clients, and I think these are very simple. One is CCFT, so cumin, coriander, and fennel tea. This is an incredibly effective tea, and you can do it hot or cold. You can let it cool down. I know a lot of people don't do hot stuff and they just can't get there. Bring it down to luke temp and you can use it, but it's incredibly enlivening for our digestive system and our Agni. And if we just sip it throughout the day, super, super helpful. So that's number 1. And then number 2 is an Abhyanga self-massage. I think this is such an effective way to balance our stress. And again, this is something, if you don't have a lot of time, you warm up a little oil if you can stand, you can do it, or you can sit down and you can be a little bit more leisurely. But doing a self Abhyanga, ideally every day, but even a few times a week, incredibly valuable. And I think those things are, for the most part, pretty easy to fit into our lives. And then the third thing is meditation. I really think that without some kind of meditation practice, whatever that is, and even if you consider in the beginning it's walking or sitting, listening to, that's what meditation is for you, then beautiful. But to kind of use the concept of meditation as something you do every day, if you can, it's going to be incredibly helpful at just slowing us down, bringing us in touch with our physiology and the world around us a little bit in more detail and more effectively.
Those are great tips. Thank you. Thank you for those. Those are awesome. Well, you've already told me what's next for you in terms of Ayurveda. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think I covered it. I think I'm really going to be, again, I'm really at this sort of junction point of launching my business. And I've been, consulting with a lot of, friends and family and a number of other people that are outside the friends and family scope, but I'm planning to really start advertising and doing sort of free intro lectures on Ayurveda more regularly and advertising to the community of meditators in LA. So that's something that I have hopefully is coming up. And then in addition is creating these courses. So I'm hoping that can be something I offer within the coming months.
Awesome. We'll be looking for both. Your greatest teacher of Ayurveda?
I got the blessing of having Vaidya Manohar, who is a renowned Ayurvedic practitioner, worked closely with Maharishi and other Vaidyas as my teacher, as my primary Vaidya in my course. And I was consistently struck by the depth that he brought to the table. He is someone who embodies Ayurveda. And so as a actual Vaidya, there's no one that I think embodies it more than him. And the way that he can communicate about consciousness is so profound.
Yeah. I like the fact you use the word embody. Yeah. So that's a good choice of words to describe Vaidya Manohar, there's no doubt. Your favorite book about Ayurveda, and it doesn't have to be, a source text, it can be, but do you have a favorite book about Ayurveda?
Beautiful. I'm like looking over to my wall over there that has my Ayurvedic text. I often will refer to the Charak Samhita, and this is something
Sure.
that, the textbook of Ayurveda, the earliest
Right.
text. But I really there's a great book that was an early book for me before I got into Ayurveda as a student,
Yes.
was by Vasant Lad, and I forget, it's like
Uh-huh.
Ayurveda Daily or something. And it was
I think it's the science of self-healing.
yes, that's it. Yes.
Yeah.
It's
It's a
just phenomenal.
little book.
Yeah, a little book read or something. And it's just, it was really beautiful and effective and clear and inspiring. So that's probably still one of my favorites.
Yeah. That's an excellent recommendation. Other people have recommended that book as well.
Oh, good.
So,
Beautiful.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Your top Ayurvedic tip for the summer season?
So I think that, and this is maybe a standard tip that most people will have, but when we tend to think of the summer, and this has just been, my experience, and people, we tend to kind of think in terms of maybe more excess, right? It's hot, let's go be outside, have a couple drinks. The things that we actually shouldn't be doing are the things that people tend to be drawn to, right? Spending a lot of time in the sun, eating hot, spicy foods, alcohol, that kind of thing. So
we start practicing like increases like.
There
right?
you go. Exactly. Yeah. So I would say to just emphasize anything that's cooling and soft and settling. And if we have to do those things and be out in the sun, then try to spend the next day being a little bit more cool. So I always in the summer favor watery, cool fruits, watermelon, grapes, anything that's going to bring sweetness and cooling influence on the physiology. And as much as we love the sun, and here in sunny Southern California, it can be wonderful, always wear a hat, always wear sunscreen outside. These things are going to just, again, bring more cooling influence to our physiology.
Right. Yeah, that's great. A great Ayurvedic principle to treat with the opposite.
That's right.
Yeah. First thing you do when you get out of bed in the morning?
So first thing I do, and it actually goes one way or the other, but I always drink water first thing. And this has been something I've done for a long time. I have, room temperature water right by my bed, and I always start with water. Sometimes I'll wait until I brush my teeth, and I always tongue scrape. And that's either the first or second thing I do is scrape my tongue after brushing my teeth, and then I'll have my water. So I think that when we start the day getting rid of anything, sometimes the idea of taking in water before we've scraped the tongue, some people feel like we could be taking in more toxins.
Sure. I've heard that. Yeah.
But I think that the scraping of the tongue is probably the most important thing you can do to start the day. And so I always do that.
And that's one of those habits that's, how, you described habits like bite size. But that's something that somebody can do in a minute.
Totally.
And it's really a game changer. And it's also, once you start doing it, you don't start your day without scraping your tongue.
100%.
So there's one thing that I'm sure Americans can easily adopt.
Yes.
So that's great. That's awesome. And my last question is, healthy habits are easy to start, but hard to maintain. And Ayurveda is all about healthy habits. How do you maintain healthy habits in your life?
So this has taken practice for me. And what I've had to learn about myself is that I can go out of balance, right? I have a Vada nature. I can be very all over the place, and I can go out of balance, but that I absolutely love routine. So what I have in my kind of way of being is my ideal routine. And this is something, we call it dinacharya, the ideal daily routine. But I have this sort of habit. It's like I do this and I do this and then this and this and this and this. And it's very simple, but it's sort of a few things that I'll do in my morning. And that morning routine of those few things, for me, it's, drinking water, brushing my teeth, tongue scraping, abhyanga, asanas, meditation, all of these things. If I'm doing those things, then everything falls into place. And since I have them in my head in this sort of little order, I do this, 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 and this, I found that it's easy to do all of them because they're like tacked together, they're grouped together. So sometimes with habits like that, you're talking about a bite-sized habit like tongue scraping. Sure. If we have a few habits that we cluster together, while it sounds like, well, that's a lot of things I have to do. Well, no, now we have one habit, which.
All right. I love that. Actually, I love that because if you're doing Abhyanga tongue scraping and maybe having a cup of CCFT, and that's, that can be one habit. Exactly. So that's perfect. So the grouping of habits is really taking that time in the morning to really start the day with some healthy habits is absolutely wonderful. So, well, Emily, this has been wonderful. I so appreciate you being a guest today on the Healthy Peaceful podcast. And I know that you indicated where people can find you, but do you want to repeat just for the video? And I will make sure everything's in the show notes as well. Best way to find you. Your new website, which I will include.
Wonderful. So you can find me by going to my website at itihasayurveda.com, or you can find me on Instagram at TM with Emily for TM related stuff, or Itihas Ayurveda for Ayurveda related stuff. And it's been such a pleasure, Noreen. Thank you so much. This is such a beautiful thing you're doing. And I love to be part of this beautiful Ayurvedic community. So such a pleasure. Thank you.